Invincible Season 3 has officially concluded, and with it, one of the most anticipated fights for Mark has also taken place in animated form. That, of course, being against the oldest and one of the strongest pureblood Viltrumites out there, Conquest. Even as someone who, as of making this video, isn't completely caught up or tapped into everything related to Invincible comics, as I've sort of just been reading the original source material that corresponded to episodes as more episodes continued to release, Conquest as a character and his significance to Invincible's plot was the very first thing I was technically spoiled on before the show got to his introduction. I want to say I found out about him through either YouTube shorts or news articles around the time Season 2 started airing. He's not even this super complex character either. Personality-wise, he's quite similar to most of the other Viltrumites with the exception of, Nolan, Mark, and Thaddeus. To put it in the simplest and most modern terms, Conquest exudes, aura. And sometimes that's all you really need to be popular. Plus, he loves the thrill of fighting and battle more than the average Viltrumite. Even when Mark tried to throw in the towel during their fight, Conquest refused to have the fight end in that manner because he was having so much fun. So now that the fight has been animated, I figured now would be the perfect time to talk about Conquest and how strong he actually is. Obligatory spoiler warning for those who haven't watched the finale yet or haven't read the comics, because I will be talking about some comics events that will likely be covered in the 4th season whenever that officially comes out. So let's get into it.
That's rough, buddy.
Obviously, Conquest is a Viltrumite, which by extension makes him not only part of one of the strongest species in the universe, but has access to all the standard Viltrumite abilities. Flight, superhuman strength, super speed, a healing factor, superhuman durability, decelerated aging, all that good stuff. That's the thing with the Viltrumite race is even the higher you go up the food chain of the pure-blooded ones, none of them have any unique abilities outside of the ones even weaker Viltrumites are born with. It's just those inherited abilities get pushed further and further depending on how hard you're working to improve in those areas. Just like regular humans who try to get in better shape at the gym, for example. They are very similar to humans in terms of biology, so I get it. Being the oldest Viltrumite, Conquest by extension has an insane amount of battle experience, which has also in turn made him stronger. Despite Season 3's semi-finale episode being his first spoken scene in the show, he was technically shown for a few seconds in Nolan's flashback of how Viltrum became one of the largest empires in the universe. When Viltrum was in the middle of the Great Purge that cut half the species in half, Conquest was one of the Viltrumites still standing after all that bloodshed. Since pretty much all of Conquest's on-screen battles have involved Mark, Oliver, Eve, and eventually Omni-Man, I'm going to be making a lot of comparisons to those characters here too. A Conquest fight with Mark in Season 3's finale was pretty one-sided for most of it. If Mark wasn't getting backed up from Eve and Oliver, there's no chance in hell he wins that 1v1. I don't think any of the other evil Marks that got teleported out of the dimension win that either. We've all seen how strong Mark has gotten over the course of Season 3 in particular. Donald even flat out stated that after all the training Mark had went through just at the beginning of Season 3 was now enough to put him on par, if not even a little bit stronger than Anissa. Another Viltrumite whom Mark only had 11% survival rate against in combat if he was to engage when she first showed up to Earth in Season 2. I'd say Mark was around a large country level at the end of Season 2, so if I were to do an increased guesstimate for his Season 3 self, I'd say somewhere between continent to moon level range at the very least. At the beginning of the Conquest fight, Conquest was absolutely eating Mark's punches, completely unfazed and even smiling wanted more. Mark was presumably going all out from the start too, because he said he wanted to hit something as hard as he could.
Is hit something as hard as I can.
A Conquest is definitely faster than Lightspeed, completely zooming through the skies and buildings while throwing Mark around like a ragdoll. At one point they were flying so fast that Oliver was struggling to keep up with them after wanting to help Mark fight. The same Oliver who was capable of enough striking force and speed to completely fly through one of the Mauler twins' torsos and punch the other one's head clean off. Oliver was extremely lucky Mark was still on sight and conscious because Conquest 1000% would have gotten the kill there if Mark didn't intervene in the nick of time. It almost took no work for Conquest to break Oliver's arm. He succeeded in breaking both Mark's hand and leg too, who, like I mentioned earlier, had at least small country level durability since he was able to tank several hits from not only alternate versions of himself, but other Viltrumites like Thula before encountering Conquest. Eventually, Eve shows up to try to assist Mark due to the fight being broadcast on TV from the hospital. Her legs are still in bad shape for the time being, but she can still use her powers relatively efficiently. Although her barriers aren't nearly enough to keep a threat like Conquest locked up. He was able to shatter the bubble with a thunderclap of sorts. Her barriers have been shown to be quite durable and can morph themselves into other materials like, steel or perhaps iron cages, as shown in her scuffle with Multipole. Then there's the Sequit fight from Season 2, where all the Guardians had to stop these alien parasites from getting to Earth, got to a point where Eve had no choice but to stall for Mark by shielding herself and the other Guardians from the rest of the Sequids. And while it was getting tough, she was able to hold on for a good bit of time. And then there was Powerplex, who was able to break some of her more flat-shaped barriers with punches thanks to power boosts he was receiving from the discs on his body. I'm making a bigger point out of this because not only has it been shown a lot of force is required to break these barriers, but it's usually being done via direct physical contact. So it's quite insane Conquest was able to do this simply by clapping his hands together once. For context, since I brought up the steel/iron cage before, about 408 tons of force is required to break apart 10 millimeter thick steel. 10 millimeters. I'd argue this could add to his intelligence strength too, at least, general battle intelligence. This character was never really doing any, hardcore thought out plans of attack prior to an enemy engaging him. Conquest is more of a berserker type fighter than any other Viltrumite. It's just he's fought so much over the years that he can just tell from even a visual cue whether or not he needs to use a specific move to break through one of these foes' abilities. And then he took a page out of Nolan's book and stabbed Eve right through the abdomen with one hand. Honestly, the fact that Eve didn't die here shows just how strong she can be by extension. The average superhero in this universe definitely would have gotten taken out by an attack like that, 100%. One of Conquest's big downsides during the second half of the fight ended up being the mechanical right arm, which Mark was able to completely destroy and thus gave Conquest less of an opportunity to get a hit in. If he still had his regular arm, I personally don't think Mark would have been able to just smash through so easily. Either Mark would have lost the clash in that moment or brute forced his way through, forcing Conquest into the ground, but Conquest would still have an arm to use. The reason Conquest lost his arm and had a big scar across his eye was a combination of the Scourge virus in a battle against the Ragnar race. The Scourge virus was an infection made by the coalition of planets in an attempt to kill Viltrumites, but all it did was make some of them a bit weaker than they originally were. Then the Ragnar monsters were actually shown back in Season 2 when Mark was reading his dad's books that gave him hints on how Viltrumites could be harmed. The Ragnars are incredibly strong creatures that can take on the average Viltrumite with ease. So at the end of the day, Conquest was technically a nerfed version of himself when he fought Mark, and he was still absolutely dominating that fight. Mark had to get really creative to even inflict serious damage at this point, like straight up biting some flesh out of Conquest's shoulder area. Eve was also able to regain consciousness for a brief moment to unleash a pink energy beam on Conquest before knocking out again. This beam was powerful enough to completely sear the skin off Conquest's entire torso area and parts of his arms. From then on, Mark was able to get the upper hand and put Conquest out of commission by headbutting him over and over. Yet even this still wasn't enough to completely kill him. As we all know, a lot of Season 3, at least for Mark's character, was his dilemma when it comes to killing villains and if it's ever justified depending on how bad the acts these villains commit end up being. It was this, slow build-up of Mark coming to this realization that in this world of heroes, sometimes these villains leave them no choice but to go for the kill. The conclusion to his fight with Conquest was this moment. Mark was completely done holding back and fully intended to kill Conquest here. But Conquest is, simply built different. Even with his face smashed to smithereens and his skin seared off, Conquest was still alive and being held captive by Cecil in a high-class government facility, where he intended to interrogate Conquest on everything there is related to Viltrum and their eventual invasion on Earth. Now, from here on out, I'm getting into more comic-related spoilers because eventually Conquest and Mark do have a little rematch when the Viltrumite War happens. Even though that's not getting adapted in the show for, I imagine, a good while, I figured I should still cover all the bases when it comes to Conquest's character. Eventually, Conquest is able to heal and break free from Cecil's 400-ton prison, fly into space, and regroup with the rest of the Viltrumites. Being put on the front lines of the war when it officially began, he would successfully draw blood from Nolan, who even before leaving Earth in Season 1 was a planetary-level threat by himself. Granted, at this point in the story, Nolan, like many of the other main characters, had gotten stronger with time, so I'm not 100% sure if Conquest would have beaten him in the 1v1 here. Maybe he beat Season 1 of the show Nolan, but here, I'm not so sure. Maybe I'll save that for another video. Speaking of that, kind of a shame we never got to see a fight between Battle Beast and Conquest. The two berserker-type characters just trading blows with each other, smiling the entire time. Unironically a tragedy, unironically. Mark would engage Conquest where they'd exchange blows evenly for a bit until Conquest set his sights on Oliver, but that old bastard underestimated Big Brother instincts, forcing his attention back onto Mark where Mark would attempt to choke the life out of Conquest, surprisingly succeeding in doing so, all the while tanking a blow through the torso just like when Eve got attacked by him in their first fight. Which, similar to Eve not dying here, this also shows just how strong Mark had gotten since their first encounter, as Mark was able to hold onto enough of his own strength to choke the life out of this guy despite having a hole punch through his chest. Even after death, Nolan couldn't help but give some respect to the fallen old soldier due to everything he'd accomplished for the Empire. So out of all the villain-side Viltrumites, Conquest, even at death, still stood as one of the strongest of his kind. A damn near unbreakable will to keep going, and his love of the thrill of battle. So overall, I'd put Conquest around a regular-sized planet-level threat due to the damage he'd been able to inflict on other characters around a similar tier as him, trading blows with Nolan, who even before leaving Earth in Season 1 was able to completely demolish the Thraxan dimension by himself, combined with Conquest himself saying how he's laid waste to other planets throughout his life as a soldier. There's not a whole lot of characters out there that would have been able to beat this guy in a 1v1 when he first showed up to Earth. So putting him at planet level seems fair to me. Kind of unfortunate how the Triangle Man still diffs though, it's just a diff. I'd be curious to know what you guys think of Conquest strength. Should it be higher or lower than what I put him at, or do you agree with my take? I'd love to know your thoughts. Don't be a stranger to leaving a like down below and subscribing for more content like this in the future, but for now, I will see you guys next time. Peace out, take care, bye-bye.